Okay, so we're coming back after a little bit of a break. We're holding towards the end of Hilchos Melicha, Siman Ayin Vav, the last few seifim, and then maybe there will be one more, possibly a shir, for Siman Ayin Zayin and Ayin Ches. In Ayin Vav, the halachas deal with Basar Litzli. So we're talking about not necessarily Melicha, per se. We're talking about the alternative method of being able to kasher the meat and eat it. I say kasher and eat it because some people may have had already the meat kashered with salting and still would want to do tzli, right? And roast it on the fire. But it could also be done at once. As we've explained, you don't really need salting, the salting process to extract the dam. You can completely take care of the two, the kashering or the removal of the dam, plus the making the meat edible at once through tzli.
If it was salted, our business right now.
Right, yeah, but I'm saying some people...
There'll be more cookfulness.
Yeah, right, exactly. And that can be accomplished all at once. And we, of course, reviewed the various minhagim. The Ramah says that the minhag is to salt it nonetheless a little bit, to be madiachet, to rinse it of any blood that may be be'ain on top of it. And here we're not necessarily talking about liver, remember. Liver is something unique. Here we're just talking about regular basar that ordinarily would require hadacha and melicha. And when we're talking about hadacha, we're talking about hadacha rishona and hadacha achroina ordinarily. Here, you can somehow get away with that by barely doing any hadacha, according to the Mechaber at least, if you took care of it right away, didn't let the salt sit on the meat.
Salting a little bit.
Right.
Was that the steep part? Was the hadacha before the salting?
No, the hadacha was before the salting. Sure. Yeah. Anyway, that was Sif Aleph and Sif Beis, and the Ramah went into additional points about how to roast if you are stuffing the chicken and so forth. And we've covered that, Baruch Hashem. Now we're on to a different, interesting halacha that for those who learned Hilchas Shchita, Hilchas Treifas, they should be familiar with it. We're talking about Siman Chof Beis. In Hilchas, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction in order to, otherwise it's a little bit hard to understand what the Halacha Gimel is talking about. The anatomy of an animal, anatomy of a cow or a chicken is such that aside from slaughtering, from shechting, the kaneh and the veshet, the windpipe and the food pipe, one really should also cut through the veins, the arteries that are running up the neck, which contain a lot of blood. And we want to get as much as blood out through the shechita. We're talking about the dam hanefesh, of course, that's coming out, that's squirting out usually when you slaughter the animal. And there could be issues if those arteries were not cut at the time that the shechita was done. It appears, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda, I mean, he's the one that requires it, even though the Rambam doesn't necessarily bring it down like that, halacha, that the requirement is not just for the shchitas hasimonin, it's for the shchitas havridin as well. At least lechatchila at the time you're shechting. If you didn't do it then, there's still a way to cut it, or to puncture the vridim after the fact. We're concerned if none of that was done, because then you have a whole bunch of blood that accumulated. And when we say accumulated, we mean pirish mimokom lemokom. So it's a dam that is not only there, present, it's also moved from place to place. And if you don't somehow get rid of that type of blood, you will not be able to do it so easily with melicha or with sli. So this blood that accumulates in the main arteries coming up the throat of the animal need to be punctured or need to be severed at the time of shechita. If they were not, so when he's mefarkes, when the animal is moving, still having spasms after the shechita, that is still a time where you can easily puncture it and get the blood to come out. And the reason I say mefarkes is because when the animal is still mefarkes, it's still moving around, the blood, the commentaries explain, is still cham, it's still hot, and therefore it could easily squirt out and come out, and it would be less of a problem later on. And that's how it is with whether you're slaughtering a chicken or whether you're slaughtering an animal. A lot of the blood pretty much accumulates in those arteries as the animal is being shechted. According to the halacha, if you're shechting an animal, whether it's a goat or a sheep or a cow, to make it kosher, it has to be that that you shechted at least rov shnei simanim, the majority of the two simanim, right, the windpipe and the food pipe. With a chicken, the eved, of course you want to slaughter both, but the eved, if you did rov siman echad, you did only one siman, the majority of one siman, it's also kosher. But this has to already do with shchita. I just mentioned it derech hagav because it just turns out, it happens to be that if shchita is done properly, at least in a chicken, you would have probably severed the arteries as well. If you do the shchita part, in other words, you've cut both simanim because they're very close, they're adjacent to the simanim. If you've done the chicken properly, you probably have severed the arteries as well. So stam shchita, stam ba'of, we say stam nishchit or nikru or the vridim have been severed. Stam, we assume, we make that assumption that the shchita was done properly. It's only when the shchita is not done 100% that it could possibly be that you still may have to puncture the vridim. With an animal, you don't say that necessarily. It's a big animal. Shchita does not necessarily accomplish that too. It should, if you know how to do it, but not necessarily. We can't make that assumption that the vridim were taken care of. So we have to explain, therefore, how does it actually happen in real life that dam is accounted for, that all that dam comes out, because here we're saying Melicha will not be able to do it, Tzli will not be able to do it even. So how does it happen in real life that all that dam is accounted for? So in Siman Chav Beis it's pretty much explained a lot more than here, because that's where the halacha is relevant, that the real issue is only when you plan to roast a chicken or cook a chicken whole. If that would never be the case, let's say you never roast a chicken whole. You always roast it or cook it in pieces. You cut it up in pieces like we do. You buy quarters. Then it's never going to be a problem, because by the time you got around to cutting it in pieces, you've already basically severed everything. Not only that, I think as the Ramah brings down the shchita, if you want to make sure you don't have this problem, just cut off the head, as we do today, after the shchita, that is, of course. You chop off the head, it's a tray, it's a nevela, right? If you just chop off the head after you've done the shchita, you don't have to worry about it, because when you do the melicha, you have b'mokum atzav, or in the neck, you have where the blood can all come out, squirt out. There's an opening, a real big opening, once you cut off the heads completely.
Wouldn't you make it because the dam may have coagulated elsewhere of the head or cut it up into pieces?
Yeah. Now right now we're really concerned with dam, not dam ha'ivorim. Remember, even according to some poskim, that is also a concern. When the dam comes out, is it moving from place to place in the ivorim, in the basar itself too, or is it just in the vridim?
But even if it was in the vridim wall,
right,
to head,
right,
or to pieces,
right.
that dam is going to the other places.
That's also true. Yeah. So hopefully, if you cut off the head, pretty much sooner than later, it takes care of it. Yeah. But
in
either
what
way,
circumstances is the blood going to travel?
It's called gravity.
it could be a few minutes later somehow. It's still
Well, kind of force it.
a force. Yeah.
Is the case that
Yeah. No, usually not. It's not.
Rest, no.
Yeah. No. The question is only later on if you cook it, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cooking.
So there's but by itself, maybe not so much. But he mentioned more about coagulate, and what.
In the environment,
Yeah.
the blood from the head would have to travel there.
Right. But coagulating, we spoke a little bit
The
about.
problem is that just leaving, we'll take that for us.
Yeah.
Try that law go down.
Yeah, coagulation can eventually be dealt with, as we will see, by just removing those arteries later on. That's called nikur, just like we have nikur of the chalev, not in chickens, but in animals. You would have nikur of the vridim, of all the arteries that may contain blood. And this is usually, in an animal, it's usually more present. You have a lot of that. By chicken, most of the blood has come out. Whatever is left over in the Yevorim comes out through Melicha. Yeah. So the problem is really more when you are going to be roasting an of shalem, a complete chicken. Therefore, as the Ramah points out, if you were to somehow cut off the head, as we do anyway, then you don't even have to worry about it, because then when you do the Melicha or the Tzli, you have a place where the blood can easily come out somehow, flow out from. The opening is large enough where that should not be a problem. So therefore, it's really more of a concern, the vridim are more of a concern, if you ever roast a shalom or cook a shalom. Because then the blood is contained there, and it's not going to come out. Well, what if you say, well, okay, I don't plan to roast a shalom. The halacha is that since you still may one day do it, because a chicken is a small animal and can easily be roasted or cooked whole, the halacha is you still have to sever the vridim, even though you plan not to roast it shalom, just in case you eventually change your mind, right? An animal that usually most people don't roast the whole thing as a whole, we don't have to worry about it so much. About in other words, severing as much as with a chicken we do, okay? Because you can eventually cut it up. It's big. The head, however, because the head is bigger, in case you do want to somehow roast it as a whole, let's say you have a goat, a korban pesach, or whatever, then the shach brings down that you should cut the neck area in two. Because it's so big, you want to do a good job that you have to cut it in two. All right, that's just a little bit of a detailed difference between a behema and a chicken. Chicken is smaller, less of an issue, nonetheless, because it can be more often than not cooked as a whole, roasted as a whole. You're always going to do the nikur of vridim. You're going to puncture the vridim or cut them off. Or with an animal, you don't have to be so concerned, because by the time you get around to doing the melicha or the tzli, it's already cut up in pieces. So you've already gotten to all the vridim. You've already removed the chaleb. You've already removed the vridim. You've already done so much, I don't want to say damage to it, but you've already basically severed the blood cells sufficiently enough that the melicha or the tzli will be able to extract whatever is still in there. That's the basic difference between the behemoth and the off. So that's why by removing the head of the chicken, it's not called shalom anymore, and takes care of that problem. You don't have to worry about the vridim anymore. Okay, so now that we have this introduction, let's see Siv Gimel. Lo nikava vridim ba'of b'shat shchita. If you did not puncture the vridim in the chicken during the time of shchita, asur lo ochlo afilu tzli, you cannot eat this chicken, even roasted, until you first cut it up pieces by pieces. Then you roast it. What about basar chai? Let's say you want to eat it raw. Now remember what we said about eating raw meat? If you are amenable to it, you don't mind eating raw meat, you can even without melicha. Why? Because there's no dam shepirish. Here, however, with chicken, we're not talking about the basar itself, because it's not a concern the dam of the evorim, because dam of evorim is not a problem. It did not move. So technically, raw meat is okay, even without melicha. But here he says, why? Because of the arteries. It says he did not do so. It was not menakev the vridim. So even in the case of wanting to eat the raw meat as is, containing the arteries of blood, it would not be possible. So therefore, if you somehow overcame that problem, if you somehow got rid of all the chutei dam, all the arteries, the blood vessels, then you could eat it even without melicha, raw, or tzli, even as one piece. Some are machmir not to eat the whole thing as a whole, even for tzli. So here he brings down another opinion that you should not eat it as a whole piece, even betzli, unless you did both. Achar chatichas avridim, cutting off the vridim, and rov shnei hasimonim, which is a very interesting halacha. We're talking about a chicken here for the most part. So why would he require rov shnei hasimonim? B'di'evet, we said that by a chicken, rov siman echad, of one of the simonim is sufficient. You have to be very careful when you shecht. There's a lot of things that can go wrong in the shechting process. Then you have the treifas that you have to worry about. But in the shechting process, if you've ever seen the knife of a shoichet, if it's a large animal, it's much bigger, longer. If it's a smaller animal, it's smaller, medium size. And then if it's a chicken, it's really small. You don't want to use too big of a knife, and you don't want to apply too much pressure. Otherwise, you do what's called a drosa to the animal. So you basically are severing the whole head, and that's nevela. It's not kosher. You can't eat it. So you have to be careful that you don't overdo it. Here we're talking about underdoing it. In other words, he didn't do the whole thing. Well, okay, good. You should try to get most simanim cut off, and a good shoichet usually does a good job. But for a first timer or someone who's not experienced, he's, I'm going to shech this thing, and he just basically cuts through the two simanim all the way, and also severs his spinal cord. Basically, it's an avela. It's not kosher. You've done it too much. You've gone through the whole thing. In some ways, he would have been better off having done just the rov of the siman and not cutting through all the way. So to get it right, just cutting the simanim, but not more than that, you have to know how to shech. That's part of practice. Lehavdil elef avdolis, chas v'shalom. I don't want to compare it, but some sheikhtim are also mohalim. And they have to be careful not to cut too much or to cut too little. Cutting too little means that they have to come back later on and finish whatever was left that could be me'akev. In other words, that the bris is not complete, and that's painful. Cutting too much is a danger to the child. We want him to let Hashem grow up and be able to have children. But if he's messed up, chas v'shalom, how do you fix him up later? So a moil has to know what he's doing, and that is why moil today uses a magen, a shield. You've seen it, so that he just takes care of the orla and not anything more than that. But anyway, that's mila. With shchita, similarly, you don't want to overdo it, because then the animal is a nevela. You know the difference between a nevela and a treifa. Nevela means that the animal is mekabel tuma, because the shchita wasn't done properly. Treifa means the animal was shechted properly, therefore there's no more tuma for the cadaver, but there could be some imperfection in the lungs, or blemish, or something like that renders it treifa. That's the basic difference. So if the shchita is not done properly, it's going to be an avela. So here we have an interesting halacha that Mechaber brings down in Yesh Shechmiru, that it's some are machmir, that you should not eat the whole thing kulo ke'echad, afilu b'tzli, only if you did chatichas avridim and rov shnei hasimanim. So this, I think it's the Rashba also brings down this opinion. Let's see if we have it over here. The Rashba is the one that holds she'nikar sabasar, that if you did remove the arteries, you did remove the chutei adam, then you could eat it raw, or you can do tzli, because he's not so he's basically of the opinion that the main issue is of dam shene'ekar mimokom lemokom by the vridim. The blood that was pirish only affected the vridim, did not affect the dam hayevorim. In other words, the organ itself. There are some who are machmir even more than that, and say the real issue is that it's going into the yevorim too. And it's not just the vridim, but his main concern is the vridim. Therefore, as the Mechaber pointed out, if you did not do it on time, you could always remove those vridim later on. And then you have the other machlokes. You have the machlokes whether you need in addition to the vridim, you need roiv shnei simanim. Rashba holds brings down the Ravid, and he says that you need both simanim, and that's what the Mechaber brings down over here. And I think it's the Gra that explains why would you need two simanim. I mean, this is all lechatchil at least, and because only by cutting the two simanim, the roiv of the two simanim, can you hopefully achieve severing the arteries or getting the most blood out. I think that's the way the Gemara explains it. If you look at the Beis Yosef says we don't find that there's such a requirement. The halacha still remains the same as in Hilchos Shchita, that if you did roiv simanecha, remember we're talking about a chicken here, or with an animal, with an animal it would be roiv shnei simanim anyway. So here, it's talking about a chicken, you wouldn't really need roiv shnei simanim b'diavad. You obviously try to get both simanim, but if you didn't and you got roiv of one, it's sufficient. Just the vridim you have to definitely sever. Otherwise, it's a little bit more of a problem later on, getting the blood out, even through whether it's through melicha or through tzli. Okay, so that's the chumrah that Mechaber brings down in Sif Gimel, that some are machmir not to eat it kuloi ke'echod, unless you sever the vridim. But we said earlier that once you remove the head, according to the Ramah, you basically accomplish that. So in a chicken, I don't think there would ever be a problem if the head was removed later, that you would have to worry about it. All right, Seif Daled. In Seif Daled, we have an interesting halacha about the shpud itself, the spit, I guess you call it, the rod that's used to roast. Is that called the spit? Yeah, right? Right? יש מי שאויסה לחתוך בסכין צלי שאצל האש שלא נמלח כל זמן שאינו ניס לכל צורכו. Okay, so let's imagine a piece of meat being roasted on the spit. The blood is being drained, so we're accomplishing what we set out to accomplish, to kasher this piece of meat. The blood is going to drain. As long as you do it for the right amount of time, all the blood will come out. And of course, it has to be done in a place where the blood can drain and not to sit. You cannot put a piece of meat, or even liver, we said, into a broiler where it's going to be sitting in its own blood. It has to be a place where the blood will drain. Now, what is happening to the blood? The blood is being drained out as a result of the heat that's drawing the blood out. Okay. Well, what happens to the spit itself? Does the spit, the piece of metal, become treif as a result of it having absorbed the blood? And this is a very, very relevant halacha. You go to a park, oh, there's a barbecue here. Can I barbecue my meat here? Let's say you just rented a cabin in the mountains, and they have a barbecue. It's a goy. Are you allowed to use their barbecue to roast your kosher meat? It's treif. And you say, well, why should you be able to? Isn't it treif? Well, if you say that, it's treif, and we'll come back to it in a moment, then does that mean if my own barbecue that is kosher, when I roasted a piece of meat that was never salted, and it is drawing the blood out now, will it become treif, and therefore I will not be able to roast any additional meat on that kosher barbecue until I first kasher it? Because if we're saying that a treif barbecue is treif and I can't use it, or can I? We obviously cannot. We obviously know about kashering. We have to do hagala, we have to do libun, you move into an apartment that's treif, you have to worry about the dishwasher, about the oven, the stove, about the sink. So we know that there's something called kashering, something that is treif. Alright, so that's the question, really a little bit of a question in Sif Daled. What happens to the shpud? Or, not only the shpud, what happens if you take this piece of meat that was not fully roasted and you slice it with a sakin? That sakin, that knife could become treif now until I do agal or libun to it.
So what's with the...
Same thing. You have to be careful. Very good. A knife that is used to shech, you cannot use that to cut a piece of meat to eat. If the dam is still roteach.
It's cold, so if it's
Yeah,
cold,
yeah,
it's so much.
right. But we do neitza bekarka. In other words, we don't use that knife of shech to cut pieces. Because it's very good. Thank you for bringing it up, because that's exactly a related issue, related halacha to that. A sakin of shechita used to cut your steak. So there is blias. So here the question is, will there really be blias in the shpud? Because on the one hand, the dam is coming out of the meat. Is it being absorbed into the metal, or perhaps the heat is taking care of everything? The heat. There are Rishonim the hold, or the seen the rush. Nura mish'ef shoiv. The heat, the fire, basically takes out all the blood and dries it up and doesn't let it be absorbed anywhere. Or you have another opinion that holds that there's something called kebole kachbolto. Even if something is absorbed in a metal, as it's being roasted, it's also coming out. It's going in. Yes, it's going in, but it's coming out. The heat. That's what heat does. Heat is powerful. It's going in. At the same time that you're roasting it, you're having a libun. Could think of it as a libun. That piece of metal is becoming kashered in the same heat. Or is it not? In other words, that's part of the question in Sif Dalet.
We say as long as something is absorbed, so wouldn't that apply by the spirit as well?
Not by metal. Not by metal. Not by metal.
So pot should be
right.
On the fire.
At
And you're
one.
cooking food.
Right.
So there shouldn't be on the fire.
Yeah.
What should be
What should be any different?
that it would be giving the food in it.
Yeah, but that's because of the liquid.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
it
yeah.
gives so
Yeah, so that's part of the question. That's part of the
according to those that hold that it does give off because it's Kabbalah Kachpolto.
Yeah.
Why-
So some say you can't say Kabbalah Kachpoltoi.
Right.
It wouldn't apply. Yeah, you wouldn't apply.
According to those who could, it would apply. There would apply.
Right.
They should be sitting by a pot as well.
Yeah, yeah, we will see. Yeah, you're right. So יש מי שאויסר סיב ד' לחתוך בסכין צלי שאצל האש שלא נמלח כל זמן שאינו ניץ לכל צורך. So the halacha reads as follows. There are some who hold that you cannot use a knife to cut a piece of meat that's being roasted, that was never salted, as long as it was not fully roasted. If it's already fully roasted, that means the blood has come out, right? This piece of meat has never been salted, so there's blood there. It's not fully roasted either, so there's still some blood there. So some say, יש מי שאויסר לחתוך בסכין, צלי שאצל האש שלא נמלח כל זמן שלא ניצל כל צורך מפני דם שנבלע בסכין, because of the blood that will be absorbed in the sakin. Well, obviously, if you did it anyway, just do hagala. There's a question, by the way, do you need hagala or liba for that sakin? We'll get to that in a moment. But you can understand why. If there's still a potential blood in this piece of meat that's being roasted, and you take it off, and now say, oh, this is too big, I want to cut it. And, hey, you didn't roast enough, there's still blood, you just don't use a knife. It's hot. Any dam that's still there will enter the sakin. But it's only yesh mi she'oiser, not everyone. The same question that applies to the sakin applies to the shpud.
No, but it's a special case, right? Just recall, because on the one hand, the Rishon.
No, it's still a Rishon in a
no,
sense.
the
The sakin is cold, perhaps.
It's cold, yeah.
It's cold. Yeah.
But nevertheless, through the and otherwise, any kind of case to transfer it from the sputter
Right.
should also be the same problem. But they say the knife, I think, because you have the additional problem of when it's used to
The
cut.
ducha, the sakina.
Right.
Yeah. But we will see that some say it would still be an issue with other kalim that are not knives too. If they touched
While
by
it was on
mistake,
fire,
while
or
it,
the
wa-
ones
while,
that
it,
was taken-
while it was on the fire, or as soon as it was removed, but it was still
Because
hot.
it's a bagush.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's
Could be.
it's
Yeah,
for a while.
yeah, could be.
Would we recognize the blood and not the...
Well, if we have a certain amount of time that we know that it takes for all the blood to come out, and after less time you cut it, that means it most likely still has dam, so you have to assume it's dam and not sear. But your question is, can we recognize? Well, I know what sear looks like. Sear doesn't look like real blood. It's a little bit reddish, but not everybody knows necessarily the difference. And if you therefore cut a piece of meat before all the dam has come out, you're running into the problem that it for sure, most likely has dam in there.
The halachic presumption would be that there is.
Yeah, there is.
Sufficient to render the same.
Exactly. יש מי שאוסר השפוט שצלו בו בשר בלא מליחה. Therefore, there are some who also answer the shpud, this actual spit, not only the knife. This is meat that you did not salt, so there's still blood in there. But here he doesn't talk about time. He just says another halacha. Any shput shetzolu babasar below melicha. So you take this piece of metal, the rod, you roasted a piece of meat that was never salted. You roasted it for half an hour. So it's not a question. It's not the same problem that with the sakin. This is just the shpud itself, because this is the thing that where the meat sat for a half an hour, and it absorbs supposedly, according to this opinion. Yesh misheoiser, v'yesh mishehoira. Some hold she'asu lahashlos etzlit ala shpud le'achar shehu samina ish, and some say, well, don't worry about the shpud. Just it's also to leave the piece of, well, besides the shpud, I should say, an additional detail. It's also to leave the piece of meat sitting on the shpud, le'achar, after you removed it from the fire, le'achar sheposek habosar milozuv, after the meat is no longer emitting blood, shema yachzor habosar acham, because maybe the meat that's still hot, v'yivla mimena, it will absorb from the hot spit. So you have here several halachas. You have the halacha of the sakin, which we'll discuss again. You have the halacha of the shpud itself. What's the din, the status of the shpud after you've done with the roasting, and then you have the question of whether can you leave that piece of meat still hanging or on the shpud after you removed it from the fire, or perhaps now that it's no longer in the fire, it will reabsorb that which came out of it. The Bechava says at the end, he makes life easy for us. He says, "V'yishim matirim b'kol zeh." Some say all of these are okay. And that's the minhag lehater, but the Ramah says, "Ve'anu nizhar lechatchila." We're lechatchila careful with this. And we're only matir b'diavad. So now we have to go a little bit deeper to see what exactly each of the opinions holds. Yeah, the Shulchan Aruch at the end, after presenting three issues, the issue of the sakin, cutting in the middle, the issue of the shpud itself, the status of the shpud after the fact, after the roasting is done, and can you leave the meat on top of the shpud after it's been removed from the fire, because it's still hot. Now this meat is no longer emitting, it will perhaps reabsorb the blias of the shpud. So these are three concerns. Mechaba says at the end, you know what? The minhag is lehatir all of this. We're not, and we're going to see why. There's different opinions amongst the Rishonim, and Mechaber holds one way, and the Ramah says lechatchila we are careful with this. And we have to understand why. So we really, and that's the question is legabe the status of the shpud, as we said before. The question is legabe the sakin, and can you leave it on top of the shpud? So the ones who aser, what do they hold? They hold that since the basar is roteach, dam is isur, why shouldn't the shpud and the sakin become aser? Simple. We're talking about roteach. We're talking about an isur called dam. And dam is an isur like nevedas and treifas. So why shouldn't they be aser? They simply hold that that's the facts. You want to therefore use that shpud again the next time around? Go ahead and make libun first. Put it on the fire, clean it up, kasher it. Now you can roast another piece of meat with it. Now, the reason why we're not always in the business of doing that is because we don't necessarily take a raw piece of meat that did not have melicha done to it and roast it, and have to be concerned now with the dam, the blias of the dam. We use our roasters or our barbecues with regular meat that has already been salted, so we're not concerned about kashering the barbecue. But if you were to do it, especially according to the Ramah, with a piece of meat that was not kashered yet, no melicha, so you have blias, according to some poskim, this dam is just like any other isur. You would have to kasher the shpud before you use it again to roast other meat, especially other meat that was already kashered, because then it doesn't have its own dam coming out. Because you can say, if I'm going to be kashering other meat that has its own blood, well, as its blood is coming out, kabbalah kapach, you can make that claim. It's emitting its own blood, therefore there won't be as much of an issue as in the other case, where you have meat that was already completely kashered, right, and has no blood of its own. So that's the opinion that asers. They treat it as an isur. What about those who are matir? What do they hold? They hold that the fire is mishav shoiv, that the fire is able to draw out all the blood. Teva ha'esh, the nature of the esh is to draw out all the blood. It will not allow it to be absorbed in the metal. or in any other thing, or that they will hold kibbola kachpot, as we said earlier. Either it does go in, but it comes out through the fire, or the fire does never let it be absorbed inside to begin with. Oh, wait a minute. The fire doesn't let it be absorbed, then how do you ever have something treif? Okay, so now we're going back to the original question that I raised. How is a barbecue ever treif?
So it's like the same, close to the fire you can clean. Like all these ovens, they clean with the fires.
Hagala or libun. That's so the question. No, but the question here is according to those who are matir, and the reason why they say is not kebola kachpoltoi. Well, or even if they do, they say that the nura mishav shoiv, that it completely burns or draws out the blood and never allows it to be absorbed into the metal. Then how do you have a treif barbecue? And the answer is like this: treifa is different. It's different than blood. Not only is treif different than blood, and we're going to explain why in a moment, the Pri Megadim brings down that the shpud, even though it did a wonderful job in getting all that blood out, it's fleishik. In other words, there are blias there. This shpud is fleishik. It has blias of meat. So, but why should there be a difference between tarfus and blood? So for that we have to turn to the achronim, who basically say that there is a distinct. Obviously, there's a difference because here we're saying a lot of poskim are matir the shpud. So there must be some difference between blood, and everybody's in agreement that if this barbecue was used for tarfus or treif, that it's treif, that you need to kasher. So what would be the difference? So I saw like this: the Rashal, the Taz, and the Pri Chodosh, they basically explain that tarfus, any animal that is treif, the isur is nisrach, much more than blood. Nisrach means that it attaches itself. Somehow, the blias of treif meat is much more, attaches itself or gets stuck in the metal much more than blood. Why? Because we are already familiar that the nature of dam is mishrak shorik. Remember those words? Dam somehow is smooth, it flows, it doesn't stick as much. And therefore they say that we are more lenient with blood, simply. Yes, it's true, the status of this barbecue is treif if it was used for treif. But now for blood, kosher blood. Why? Because blood is mishrak shorik. It doesn't necessarily get absorbed as much as tarfus. A very interesting nekuda, because it's a good. I mean, the ones who are machmer say dam is iser, and they, in some ways, they're right. It is iser, and so why should there be a difference? So for those who say it's aser, it's aser. But I'm talking about those who say it's mutter. They would explain that dam is mishrak shorik, it doesn't get stuck so much, and therefore the fire does a wonderful job in getting everything out and not letting it be absorbed. But I saw another explanation, the Sefer Kanfi Yoina. The Sefer Kanfi Yoina brings down it's a chidush. And this is a chidush I haven't seen anywhere else. He says, you know what the difference between the Isur Dam and other Isurim? Is that what happens with Dam, the mamoshes of the dam, the ikar isur or dam, the essence of dam is not absorbed, and only the tam is absorbed, and the tam of dam is not asur. It's not asur the shpud. Very interesting. It says by isurim, regular isurim, tam ki ikar, we asur the tam as much as the mamoshes of the isur. With dam, he wants to say it's a chidush. It's a chidush. I never saw it anywhere else. That we only answer the mamoshes of the dam, you see the blood, that's also not tam that came from dam. So what's coming into that shpud is a tam of dam, and that's not an elsa. Interesting, huh?
Very dangerous.
No, it's not a thing.
It is a very dangerous. It is that the dam be'atzmo, one can consume. So the taste of dam is actually a taste of when you.
Well, it depends which dam. You can't consume any dam.
Well, dam by itself, in and of itself, unless something special happened to it. Like if it's dam haparush.
Yeah, sure.
Right. But if nothing special happened to it, in and of itself.
Well, dam nefesh. I mean, it's chorus. You have chorus.
What?
The dam nefesh.
Dam nefesh.
Right.
So again, it's something. It's special dam. It's
special dam.
In
right.
a certain situation. It's
right.
Conditions that which is separated from the body.
Right.
But blood in and of itself, Metzias as blood, if you just say blood,
it's a different
it's
kind
blood.
of Isser.
It's nothing's usher about the blood.
So you're
unless it's in a special situation.
So you're basically
And the
helping
taste,
this.
Yes, I'm saying what the idea is behind it, I think.
Yeah, okay, very
and
good.
The taste is the taste of the blood. You can't make a distinction between the taste of the blood that was
Right.
moved from place to place, Bama Parosh, versus the taste
Right.
of the blood that wasn't. So the taste is the taste of a blood, so it's a taste of something that's
It's a different hefzer, that's what you're saying.
And the taste that you're, and what makes the blood usher, you're not recognizing that part of the isser.
Yes.
Now, the fact that it was parish is not recognizing, so the parish doesn't have a taste.
Right.
It's only the blood that has the taste. So it's a little bit similar perhaps to an isser balua.
Yeah, but an Yisur Balua is an
A little
Yisur
similar-
Balua.
No, except but the Yisur balua, the isser that is also giving us. No,
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Right.
or maybe one
Right.
should say it's not an isser that's mispatel.
Yeah.
That's balua. Because of or similar to the soul that has absorbed something, but can't usher more than the thing that absorbed.
Yeah, could be. It could be.
In all these situations,
Yeah.
what you're tasting is not what makes it usher. You're tasting the heter.
Could be. It could be. Interesting chiluk. So anyway, obviously we know the halacha legabe treifus. Anything that's treif needs to be kasher if it's possible to kasher it. Here we're dealing with a unique scenario that we're dealing with blood, and that's where we had the various machlokes. We had the mechaber that was more lenient. We had the ramah that is more machmer.
But it's not possible to kasher.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And he used the shput that before he used for regular meat.
What is that? One more time.
You know, the square that liver.
Yeah.
Can they?
Well, that's the same question.
Right.
That's the same question.
But can they use the same roast liver?
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah. Well, that's the same
Forget about
question
the
because they eat. Yeah, the dam here is even more serious. This is dam and basar. With covered is, remember, it's even in some ways less of an issue. So it's the same question. Would you have to do libun or agola? So let's basically see. Let's wrap it up with halacha lemaisa how we conduct ourselves. The Pri Megadim says that you should not. He says you should not cut piece of meat while the piece of meat has in the process of being roasted and the roasting was not complete. You should not use a sakin to cut it, because he says the dam will be nivla in the sakin, and that's the first opinion of the mechaber. He holds like that. However, since the Pri Megadim and others did not necessarily go on to explain what the halacha is legabe de shput, they only were machmer legabe de sakin, the Gra explains that it could be that the shput is not asur. Why? Because by shput you have the additional concept of kebolo kachpoltoi. Kebolo kachpolto, as the shpud is being used to roast the meat, the heat that is being applied to the roasting of the meat, even though you may say that it absorbs the dam into the shpud, it also has the same koach to extract, to take out the dam at the same time from the shpud. You don't say that by a sakin, you don't say that by the knife, right? So if you take a knife and you cut a piece of meat, well, the meat is still hot, of course, and all the blood has not come out yet through the process of tzliya, right? You're going to have a problem. You're going to have the blias come into the sakin. But with the shpud is still, it's not cold, the shpud is hot. So it could be that that's where the Pri Megadim didn't give an opinion as to what the din of the shpud would be. He just says, halacha, don't use a sakin. The tzliya process is not complete. There's still blood there. It's going to be absorbed into the sakin. Explains the Gra that by shpud, it could be that you hold like the Ran, and the Ran is the one that presents, at least he's one of them, the one that says, as kebolo kachpoltoi. So the kebolo kachpoltoi, you don't have to concern yourself by a shpud. Now, what's interesting is that the mechaber in Siman, if you remember in Siman Samach Tes, brought an opinion. It's only one of the opinions in Siman Samach Tes that holds that if you went ahead and cut a piece of meat in the midst of the melicha process, that you have to make hagala to the knife. Meliach is keroteach, and you have, like you said, the ducha, the sakina, the combination of the two. There's still blood coming out in the middle of the melicha process, right? So he brings down that opinion that you would have to do hagala to the sakin, to the knife. If you remember that in Siman Samach Tes, he says that you would have to do that if it's in the middle of the melicha. So why would he be lenient over here? Here apparently he's lenient. Why is he lenient here? He doesn't even mention it at all. Because here we have the svara of the Rosh, that Nura Mishef Shoiv. You don't have that. You don't have that by Melicha. Yeah. You don't have that by Melicha. By Tzliya, you have the heat of the fire that is drawing it all out. So therefore, you could be definitely lenient. Again, in the early halacha and Melicha, it's only one opinion. Not everybody holds like that you have to worry about the sakin. But it's interesting that over there he was more concerned about it. In the middle of the Melicha, you were cutting a piece of meat, you would have to worry about the Melichas and the sakin, and not here. Because here, you have the svar of the Rosh, the Nura Mishav Shoiv. The fire draws it out. You have the advantage here that you don't have there. So that's why here the Shuchan Aruch is matir l'maisa. He's not at all concerned about the status of the sakin, the status of the shpud. No problem whatsoever.
No, so what was exactly his one more time?
Over there by Melicha, he brings down that opinion. One opinion that says you would have to do a gala to that knife that cut the piece of meat in the midst of the. Here you have a shpud that's with fire, so you have the sword of the rosh, which is mishav shoiv during the time. There's no. Forget about kabbalah kachpolto. Mishav shoiv is strong enough to always take out or not allow the dam to be absorbed. So you don't have to worry about the sakin or the shpud in a sense, because whatever the din of the shpud is some want to be mechala between sakin and shpud, by the way, as we said with the Megodim, but others will just say the rush across the board. Once it's still hot, mishav shoiv, you don't have to worry about any bliyas. Interesting, not even in the sakin and not even in the shpud. But at least legabe the shpud, it's clear. It's much clearer than it is for the sakin. Sakin, you can make a claim, the sakin is not as hot, the source of fire is on the shpud. But that's at least the difference in the mechaber between here and before.
Would it depend how you're using the sakin, where it is more similar to the shpud, or if it's used in a situation where it's to be machmer?
Yeah, well, all I know is that the Pri Megodim says that with the sakin you have to be careful, because you don't have any, according to him, you don't really have the other svaras as much as you do in the shpud, apparently. So you have to be careful. Now, when the Ramah says, by the way, that we are careful lechatchila, what does he mean that we're careful lechatchila and we're mate b'dever? What he means is that he said that we do libun. When he says we're careful lechatchila, what do you mean you're careful lechatchila? You don't do it? No, you're careful lechatchila means that you actually do libun, but if you forgot and you didn't do libun and you went ahead and prepared other meat on the same shpud, it's okay. The reason why we know this is because in Hilchas Yom the Ramah there brings down that you're allowed to, between Sli and Sli, you're allowed to kasher the shpud. And on Yom Tov we know, just like on Shabbos, you're not allowed on Shabbos, you can't kasher anything, you can't be metak in the kli, you can't even take it to the mikveh to be toivelet. It's a tikkun kli. So even though on Yom Tov you're allowed to use fire, you're allowed to cook, you're allowed to roast, you shouldn't be able to just kasher. You can't just kasher something on Yom Tov, but because that kashering that he mentions there is only a chumrah. It's only a chumrah to kasher between libun and libun, or between roasting and roasting. Therefore, if he says you can go ahead and do it. So there we see, I think that's the way I understood from the various achronim, the poiskim, that he at least, not the meaning of today, of how we conduct ourselves, he requires, or at least some require, a libun, kashering the shpud between sli and sli. And remember, we're only talking about a sli that still has blood in it. If you're just roasting a piece of meat, you don't have to do anything.
And it wasn't salted.
It wasn't salted, exactly. Only we talk about the piece of meat that is being roasted that still has its blood. Some would require a libun between one piece of meat and the other piece of meat.
Could we do?
What? Right, yeah, we'll talk about that. The shpud? No, here it's not a question. No. Here it's either kebolo kach poltoi on the shpud. It goes in, it will come out, or you say nura mishav shoiv. The fire draws it all out, and it's not a problem. According to Pri Megodim, you're not making only behefsed meruba. And for those who hold you need to kasher the knife, the question is, do you need libun or hagala? I think the majority of persons say hagala is sufficient. Even though you may want to say, you need libun because this was close to fire, they say hagala in this case would be sufficient. In other words, it's not the real shpud. It's just a sakin. Legabe the din of the shpud, the Ravid holds that it's boileya, and it becomes osir. And the same thing with the Rashba. They actually hold the shpud is boileya, becomes osir. And therefore the Ravid even says, go ahead and remove it right away. Remove the meat right away from the shpud. Don't let it sit. Remember that halacha? Why? Because if you let it sit, it's not going to reabsorb from that shpud that is osir.
It is going to be.
Yeah, according to the Ravid, he says, therefore take it off right away. Yeah, there's a question amongst the poskim also if the meat was removed early. There still has some blood, whether the shpud in that case, or the basar, or both, are asur or not. There is a whole dian on that. I'm not going to get into that right now. If somebody were to remove it before the time. The Taz speaks a little bit about it. Yeah. Anyway, halacha lemaisa, the poskim write that we hold kibola kach poilto, even if it's removed from the fire. I think the majority of them do, so we don't have to be concerned about it. How do we do it today? Today, it's interesting. Nobody does it even like the Ramah. In other words, if you look around, the minhag, you ask around, there is no minhag per se to be melabin, to actually kasher, when you're talking about dam right now. I'm not talking about treifas, remember? Big difference. With dam, nobody really, maybe a few people on Machmer, nobody really goes to the extra step of kashering a shpud that was used with meat that had blood in it, that was not salted. That's, and some say the reason why we don't really take that extra chumrah like the Ramah would suggest is because usually the meat is roasted for so long that until it becomes dry almost, that by that time the shput has already become meluban. In other words, after an extensive amount of time on the fire, even the shput also becomes meluban. So therefore, you don't really need to do it. But as Zilan mentioned before, there can be a problem if that basar, in the midst of being roasted, touched the kedera, touched another pot. And then it could make a difference whether the pot, you need a gala, or if it's cheres and you can't use it anymore because you're having, blood. Because even though we're talking about kibola kach polto nuro mishav shoiv legabe, legabe the meat itself, legabe the shpud, it doesn't mean that would apply legabe another keli. Just a second here. However, I saw something interesting. With a keli, it may not be an issue. I mean, you don't touch a pot. Does not come in contact necessarily with the spit.
Oh, but also with the meat. Once you roast
it, with the meat, yeah.
You have to put it somewhere.
Sometimes when they take it out, they have to put it late.
Yeah. Okay, I guess in that case it may happen.
You have to put it somewhere else.
No, but when you're putting it, you're going to put it hopefully after it was done with completely. The only concern is when it still has blood in it. If it was touching it in the midst of being roasted, not after the fact, after the blood has come out. It's not a good question.
But when they remove it, they still have to put it.
Oh, at some point, yeah. But I saw the following scenario. Well, what happens if that piece of meat, as being roasted, touched another piece of food? You see, with kalim, somehow the fire, you can claim that the fire absorbs, the heat absorbs everything and does not somehow affect even another keli. That's a possibility. Because nura mishav shoiv is a very important idea, concept, that says, as it's all burning, anything that comes, even the sakin, as we said, it's not going to affect it. The fire is so hot, it doesn't allow it to be absorbed. But that is not necessarily the case if it touched other food. Other food that somehow touched this piece of meat, food is soft. Because this food is rach, soft, it could be that it would become asur. It could be that piece of food would become treif. I mean, you won't be able to do it because it would have absorbed blood, and now go take out that blood. How are you going to do that? So obviously, when you're kashering chicken, meat, or when you're roasting it, taking out the blood through the fire, you obviously want to be careful with all of these halachas. I mean, you want to make sure that it's completely roasted, so then you don't have an issue of whether you cut it later, you're still cutting meat that has blood. And then be concerned with the beliyas, right? And of course, you don't want to have anything else touch it. The question is more relevant about the shpud itself. What do we do with the shpud? So we have enough rishonim and poskim that hold that the shpud is not an issue with dam. That's what's interesting. With the dam, it's not an issue because either you say nura mishav shoiv, it draws out all the blood as it's roasting, in other words, the heat, or you say kibola kach poltoi, which is also a concept that we learn that applies in many areas of halacha and Yore Deah, that even though something does come out, it will eventually come. If something comes in, it eventually will come out. So that fire, obviously, either way, has the koach to resolve this issue of blood one way or another, not only in the meat, but in the shpud itself, as opposed to treifas. With treifas, obviously, it's different. In other words, we obviously consider that barbecue a treif barbecue. you're going to go anywhere. And even though there was tremendous amount of fire while it was being used, it's still, there's blias of tarfus, and with blias of tarfus we are, of course, makbid.
Like, if we don't take it out, it gets absorbed back into it. But if we take it out, so
Yeah, that was the other concern. If you don't take it out right away according to the Ravid, it may be sitting on the shpud and it may still absorb.
right.
Yeah.
If you take it, let's say in a pan, then we have to concern again about that pan why something happened.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
So I use a good custom to put a bread on it in that pan and take a piece of bread and take it out on the bread.
On the bread, yeah.
So it doesn't.
We'll talk about that next time. Yeah, putting it on the bread. But anyway, it's important to remember that even though the Ramah says that we're nizar lechatchila b'diavad, it's okay. It's talking about all the halachas that were mentioned in Sif Dalet, and the Mechaber himself says yesh matirim bechol zeh v'chein aminig lahatir, that in the end you don't have to be concerned, even if you didn't remove it right away. Even if you didn't remove it right away, in other words, even in that scenario, because we hold, like the other opinions of Mishav Shoiv, that all the blood never really got in there to begin with, which is an interesting concept, because in Tarfus we are makbid. But in Dam, as we explained earlier, it could be either because Mishrak Shorik, it never went in, or if you hold the concept of Kabbalah Kachpolta, when it did go in, it eventually came out, and therefore, so what, if the mit is still sitting on the shpud? But the Ramah says we're careful. Lechatchila, we obviously are makbid, but the minute today is we're really not that concerned about it. Especially if you're going to be roasting it until the end anyway, then you have less of an issue. There'll be still blood in, because obviously if there's still blood in there, it could be a concern. Later on, after you removed it from the fire, you're cutting it now with a sakin. Obviously it's the same issue as we had it before in Melicha. In the process of Melicha, you're cutting the piece of meat. But if it's completely roasted, the good news is the Baruch Hashem, the blood has come out of the meat. The blood is not in the shpud. You can go ahead and do some more shpud, some more barbecuing, even though it's still, the piece of meat has still blood. Whereas with tarfus, obviously you can't do that. You would have to first kasher it properly with libin or hagala, whichever applies. Okay, let's stop there.